On the morning of December 6, 1917, Halifax Harbor looked peaceful. The winter air was sharp and clear. The water lay calm beneath a pale sky, broken only by the slow movement of ships lining up to pass through the narrow entrance to the harbor. Smoke drifted lazily from funnels. Bells rang. Steam hissed. It was an ordinary morning in an extraordinary time. Children sat in classrooms overlooking the water, distracted by the steady parade of vessels. Dock workers unloaded cargo, as they had done hundreds of times before. Shop owners unlocked their doors. Nurses prepared for another long day. No one sensed danger. No one imagined that within minutes, their city would be transformed into a place of fire, ruin, and silence. Floating quietly in the harbor was a ship carrying one of the deadliest cargoes ever assembled by human hands, and almost no one knew it. Late on December 5th, a French cargo ship called the Mont Blanc arrived outside Halifax. It had sailed from New York under cover of darkness. Its cargo was not ordinary freight. Deep inside its holds were thousands of tons of high explosives, picric acid, TNT, gun cotton, and barrels of benzol, a fuel so volatile that a single spark could ignite it. The Mont Blanc was essentially a floating bomb. Under wartime rules, ships carrying explosives were not required to display warning flags. Doing so could attract German submarines waiting offshore. The logic was simple. Secrecy was survival. The danger, however, was shifted onto civilians who had no idea what was passing beside their homes. At the same time, another ship prepared to leave. The SS IMO was a Norwegian vessel chartered to carry humanitarian aid to Belgium. Delayed and impatient, its crew was eager to depart as soon as possible. The ship was behind schedule, and pressure to move quickly was intense. Halifax Harbor had only one narrow entrance. Ships entering and exiting had to coordinate precisely. Normally, traffic moved cautiously, but on that morning, impatience and misunderstanding took control. As daylight broke, the Mont Blanc entered the Narrows, moving slowly and carefully. The IMO, leaving the harbor, approached at an unusually high speed. Signals were exchanged. Each ship expected the other to give way. Each believed it had the right of passage. Neither yielded. At 8:45 a.m., the bow of the IMO slammed into the side of the Mont Blanc. The impact crushed barrels of benzol stacked on deck. Liquid fuel spilled instantly. Vapors spread across the ship. Sparks flew as metal scraped against metal. Fire erupted almost immediately. At first, it did not seem catastrophic. Fires on ships were not uncommon in wartime, but the crew of the Mont Blanc knew what the flames meant. They understood, with horrifying clarity, what would happen if the fire reached the cargo hold. There was no firefighting equipment capable of stopping it. The captain ordered the ship abandoned. The crew lowered lifeboats and rowed desperately toward shore. They shouted warnings. They screamed that the ship was about to explode, but their voices were lost in the distance, drowned out by confusion and disbelief. The burning Mont Blanc drifted slowly toward the Halifax waterfront. On shore, people stopped to watch. Curiosity overcame caution. Fires were interesting. Fires were spectacles. Children pressed closer to classroom windows. Dock workers paused their labor. Some people moved toward the water for a better view. No evacuation order was given. No sirens sounded. There was no system in place to warn the city. Time passed. The fire grew hotter. At 9:04 a.m. and 35 seconds, the Mont Blanc detonated. The ship vanished in an instant. A blinding flash turned the morning white. The explosion released energy, greater than any man-made blast in history up to that point. A shockwave ripped through the city at unimaginable speed. Buildings disintegrated where they stood. Steel beams bent. Karma brick walls collapsed into dust. The harbor water was forced violently outward, exposing the seabed for a brief, impossible moment before rushing back in a massive wave. People near the shore were swept away, crushed or drowned. A towering mushroom cloud rose miles into the sky. The sound was heard hundreds of kilometers away. Windows shattered as far as Prince Edward Island. The ground trembled like an earthquake. In seconds, Halifax was unrecognizable. What followed was chaos. Those who survived the initial blast emerged into a nightmare. Streets were gone. Familiar landmarks had vanished. Fires burned uncontrollably across the ruins. Survivors stumbled through debris, bleeding, burned, and blinded by flying glass. Glass injuries were everywhere. Thousands had been standing at windows, watching the fire. When the blast hit, shards turned into lethal projectiles. Many were permanently blinded in an instant. Hospitals were overwhelmed within minutes. Some were damaged themselves. Doctors worked non-stop, performing surgeries without anesthesia. Limbs were amputated to save lives. Nurses collapsed from exhaustion. Families searched desperately for loved ones. Many would never find them. As night fell, a blizzard swept in. Snow covered the ruins. Temperatures dropped. Rescue efforts slowed. Survivors trapped beneath debris froze to death before help could reach them. By the time the full scale of the disaster became clear, nearly 2,000 people were dead. More than 9,000 were injured. 25,000 were homeless. Entire neighborhoods had been erased. The city demanded answers. How could this happen? How could such a ship be allowed into the harbor? Who was responsible? A formal inquiry was launched. Witnesses were called. Survivors testified. Harbor officials were questioned. Blame moved from one group to another. Responsibility shifted repeatedly, and no single individual was fully held accountable. Public grief and outrage were immense. International donations poured in. Boston's aid response became legendary. Survivors lived with permanent injuries and trauma. Even today, questions remain. Halifax rebuilt, regulations improved, and lessons were written into law and memory. But more than a century later, ships still pass through the Narrows. Calm above, danger remembered beneath the water. At 9:04 a.m., Halifax learned that lesson forever.